The air in the classroom was thick with tension, the kind that made even the fluorescent lights feel oppressive. Ms. Carmichael, the most feared teacher at Ridgewood High, stood at the front of the room, her eyes locked onto a single student. The usual whispers and restless shuffling of classmates had vanished. Everyone was frozen, watching. Lena Walker, the quiet girl in the third row, sat stiffly at her desk. Her hands clutched the edge of her notebook, knuckles white. She wasn't crying, though. She wasn't shaking, either. But the humiliation painted on her face was undeniable. "You really thought you were going to outsmart me?" Ms. Carmichael's voice dripped with condescension. "That's adorable." Lena didn't respond. She never did. Ms. Carmichael slammed a test paper onto Lena's desk. A bold red 0 was circled at the top. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not amused. Plagiarism is a serious offense." A murmur rippled through the class. "Plagiarism?" Lena's lips parted slightly, as if she were about to say something, but then she closed them again. Ms. Carmichael smiled, triumphant. "That essay was far too advanced for a student who never speaks in class. If you think I'm going to believe you wrote it yourself, think again. I don't tolerate dishonesty, and I definitely don't tolerate cheaters." Lena's fingers twitched. She still didn't speak. Ms. Carmichael leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "If you had half a brain, you'd take responsibility and admit what you did." And that's when Lena, for the first time, spoke up. "I wrote every single word of that essay." The class collectively inhaled. Ms. Carmichael's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, really?" she said, crossing her arms. "Then prove it. Right now. In front of everyone." Lena's eyes met hers, and something in that quiet gaze sent a chill through the room. She picked up her pen. And then the bell rang, cutting through the moment like a blade. "Tomorrow," Ms. Carmichael said, voice hard. "Be here after school. You're going to rewrite that essay in front of me. And when you can't, you'll admit you lied." She turned away before Lena could respond, before she could see the quiet steel in the girl's expression. Because what Ms. Carmichael didn't know, what no one had realized yet, was that Lena wasn't just smart. She was smarter than her teacher. And by the time she was done, Ms. Carmichael would learn that lesson the hard way. 3 weeks earlier. The cafeteria was loud, but Lena had perfected the art of tuning out the noise. She sat alone at a corner table, flipping through her notebook. The pages were filled with dense, handwritten notes, not just about school subjects, but detailed theories, creative essays, and complicated math equations. It wasn't that she couldn't talk to people. She just didn't see the point. Most of the students in Ridgewood High didn't care about the things she did. And teachers? They rarely looked past her silence. Except for Ms. Carmichael. Lena had noticed the woman watching her in class, that sharp, assessing gaze. And when their latest essay assignment had been returned, Lena's with a perfect score, she knew Ms. Carmichael was going to be a problem. Ms. Carmichael didn't believe she was capable of writing something that good. And now, she was going to make Lena prove herself. But what Ms. Carmichael failed to realize was that Lena had always been underestimated. And that was her first mistake. Lena sat motionless in her chair long after the final bell rang. The other students had filtered out, their laughter and chatter fading down the hall. The classroom was empty now, except for her and Ms. Carmichael. The teacher stood near her desk, arms crossed, watching Lena with that same cold amusement. The assignment paper lay between them, a blank page that seemed to taunt them both. "Go on then," Ms. Carmichael said, tapping her fingers against the desk. "If you really wrote that essay yourself, this should be easy for you. Show me." Lena took a breath and picked up her pen. For the first few moments, the only sound was the quiet scratching of ink against paper. Ms. Carmichael stood back, waiting for her to falter, waiting for her to hesitate, to prove she was lying. But Lena didn't hesitate. Her hand moved swiftly, her thoughts pouring onto the page with precise clarity. Her sentences formed naturally, structured perfectly, one after another. The essay wasn't just good, it was brilliant. The kind of writing that didn't just meet expectations but shattered them. Ms. Carmichael's smirk twitched, ever so slightly. She stepped closer. "Let me see that," she said, snatching the page before Lena could finish. Her eyes scanned the words, and for the first time, Lena saw something new in her expression. Doubt. Ms. Carmichael masked it quickly, setting the paper down. Anyone can memorize an essay, Lena, she said, her voice sharp. Let's see if you can write about something new, right now. She grabbed a fresh sheet of paper, scribbled down a topic, and slid it in front of Lena. The role of individualism in modern society. Lena glanced at the topic, then met Ms. Carmichael's gaze. She picked up her pen again. This time, she wrote even faster. The ideas formed instantly in her mind, flowing smoothly onto the page. Within minutes, she had crafted an introduction so compelling it could have been published in a top academic journal. Ms. Carmichael read the page again. And this time, she looked nervous. Lena could see it, the tightening of her lips, the way her fingers tensed slightly as she held the paper. The teacher swallowed, setting it down more carefully than before. You could have memorized this structure too, she said, but the confidence in her voice was cracking. Lena didn't reply. She simply waited. Ms. Carmichael stood up straight, her composure returning. I still don't believe it, she said. Someone must be helping you. No student writes this well. Not without outside influence. Lena finally spoke. You mean no student you expect to be smart writes this well? The words hung in the air between them. Ms. Carmichael's eyes narrowed. Watch yourself, Lena. But it was too late. Lena had seen the truth. Ms. Carmichael wanted her to fail. She needed her to fail. Because if Lena was really this intelligent, it meant Ms. Carmichael had been wrong. And if there was one thing the strict, unforgiving teacher could not stand, it was being proven wrong. Lena stood up, gathering her things. I've done what you asked, she said quietly. I proved myself. But you still don't believe me. So I guess the real question is, why? Ms. Carmichael had no answer. But Lena wasn't going to let it go. Because now, this wasn't just about proving she was smart. It was about showing Ms. Carmichael exactly how wrong she was. And Lena had a plan. What Ms. Carmichael didn't know was that Lena had been playing the long game. And soon, she'd realize that the quiet girl she tried to bully was about to outsmart her in a way she'd never see coming. The following week, Ms. Carmichael seemed to be watching Lena more closely than ever. In class, her sharp eyes followed every move Lena made, every note she took, every assignment she turned in. It was clear the teacher was looking for something, anything, to confirm her own suspicion that Lena wasn't as smart as she appeared. But Lena gave her nothing. She continued to excel in her work, submitting essays that were not just good, but flawless. Her answers in class were rare, but when she did speak, her responses were so well articulated that even the other students started whispering about it. And yet, Ms. Carmichael refused to acknowledge it. Instead, she doubled down. One afternoon, Lena was called to the front of the class without warning. Since you're so brilliant, Ms. Carmichael said with a smirk, why don't you solve this problem in front of everyone? She picked up a marker and scribbled a complex equation on the whiteboard, one far beyond their current grade level. Gasps rippled through the class. She's definitely not solving that, someone whispered. Lena stood up slowly, her heart steady. She walked to the board, picked up the marker, and started writing. Not hesitating. Not second-guessing. And within seconds, the answer was there, perfect, precise, undeniable. The room fell silent. Ms. Carmichael's fingers curled against her palm. Her smile was gone. Lena turned, placed the marker down, and calmly walked back to her seat without another word. For the first time, Ms. Carmichael had nothing to say. But Lena knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Later that day, Lena sat in the library, flipping through her notebook, when she felt a presence beside her. Okay, what was that? She looked up to see Jake Bennett, one of the top students in school. Unlike most of their classmates, he was actually smart, not just someone who memorized things for tests. Lena raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Jake sat across from her, lowering his voice. That equation. No offense, but I didn't even understand half of it. And I'm top of the AP calculus class. How did you do that? Lena hesitated, then closed her notebook. I read ahead, she said simply. Jake frowned. That's not just reading ahead. That's years ahead. She didn't respond. Jake leaned back, shaking his head. You're, like, actually a genius, aren't you?" Lena sighed, looking down. "Not really." But Jake laughed under his breath. "Yeah, no. You are." Then his expression turned serious. "So why does Ms. Carmichael hate you so much?" Lena hesitated again, then met his gaze. "Because I'm proving her wrong." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he smirked. "Well, keep proving her wrong. This is the most fun I've had in class all year." Lena didn't smile back, but something about his words stuck with her. Because proving Ms. Carmichael wrong wasn't enough anymore. Now, she needed to expose her. And she had just the plan to do it. The plan started taking shape over the next few days. Lena was meticulous. She knew she couldn't rush this. Ms. Carmichael wasn't just a strict teacher. She was prideful, and that meant she would never admit she was wrong unless she had no other choice. So Lena had to give her no other choice. She started small. Every class, she made sure to complete her work to perfection. Not just her usual high-quality work, undeniable perfection. She answered questions when called upon, making it clear she understood concepts at a level beyond anyone else in the room. And Ms. Carmichael hated it. The teacher's comments became sharper. "You always have an answer, don't you? Seems like someone's enjoying the spotlight." But Lena never reacted. She just kept proving herself. Then came phase 2. Lena had done her research. She knew that Ms. Carmichael prided herself on never making mistakes. She loved putting students on the spot, especially when they were wrong. But what happened when she was the one making mistakes? Lena started paying attention, looking for anything that Ms. Carmichael got wrong. And soon enough, she found it. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Lena made her move. Ms. Carmichael was giving a lecture on an upcoming literature assignment. A prime example of symbolism is in The Great Gatsby, where Fitzgerald uses the red light across the bay. Lena's hand went up. The class turned to look at her. She never raised her hand. Ms. Carmichael paused, narrowing her eyes. "Yes, Lena." Lena's voice was calm, collected. "It's actually a green light, not red." A flicker of irritation crossed Ms. Carmichael's face. "Excuse me." The light Gatsby stares at across the bay. "It's green, not red," Lena said, symbolizing hope and unattainable dreams. A murmur swept through the class. Lena saw the teacher's jaw tighten. "Is that so?" Ms. Carmichael said, her voice clipped. "Well, I suppose that's debatable." "It's not though," Lena said, tilting her head. "It's literally written in the book. Chapter 1. Another murmur. Ms. Carmichael's grip on the podium tightened, but she forced a smile. "All right, if you say so." Lena didn't press further. She just nodded and let it sit there. But now, the students were noticing. Jake leaned over as she sat back down. "That was brutal," he whispered, barely holding back a grin. Lena didn't grin back. She wasn't done yet. By Friday, Lena had done it 3 more times. First, it was a misquote from Romeo and Juliet. Then, a mistake in a math formula Ms. Carmichael wrote on the board. And finally, an outright wrong historical fact about the Declaration of Independence. Each time, Lena corrected her politely, precisely, without arrogance. Each time, the class noticed. And each time, Ms. Carmichael's frustration grew. Until, finally, she snapped. It was at the end of class when it happened. Ms. Carmichael had just finished assigning homework when she turned, her gaze locking onto Lena. "You seem to enjoy correcting me, don't you?" The room fell silent. Lena remained calm. "I just want to make sure we're learning accurate information." Ms. Carmichael's jaw clenched. "Well, I have something for you, Miss Walker." She walked to her desk and grabbed a single sheet of paper. "Since you love showing off, here's a special assignment. Due Monday. 5,000 words. On the limitations of intelligence." Gasps rippled through the class. Lena felt her fingers tighten around the edge of her desk. This wasn't an assignment. It was a punishment. A way to humiliate her. Ms. Carmichael smirked, satisfied. "Maybe this will teach you that knowing everything isn't always a good thing." But what Ms. Carmichael didn't realize was that she had just made the biggest mistake yet. Because Lena wasn't going to back down. She was going to write that essay. and she was going to make sure Ms. Carmichael regretted ever underestimating her. Now, before we continue, let me ask you, what would you do in Lena's situation? Have you ever had a teacher treat you unfairly? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. Lena had until Monday, and by the time she turned that essay in, Ms. Carmichael would never see her the same way again. Lena spent the weekend crafting her essay with the same precision she used for everything else. But this time, it wasn't just about writing well, it was about strategy. Ms. Carmichael thought she could use this assignment to humiliate Lena, to force her into silence. But Lena saw it for what it really was, a challenge. And she never backed down from a challenge. She sat at her desk, laptop glowing in the dim light of her room, fingers flying across the keyboard. The limitations of intelligence. A topic designed to break her. But instead, she was going to weaponize it. She structured her essay carefully, making sure every point built toward something undeniable. She started with the common perception of intelligence, grades, test scores, academic achievements. Then she transitioned into the idea of true intelligence, adaptability, emotional awareness, strategic thinking. And then, in the final section, she flipped the argument entirely. She wrote about how authority figures, especially those who feared being challenged, often mistook intelligence for arrogance. How they punished those who outshined them instead of fostering their growth. And finally, she ended with the most damning statement of all. The greatest limitation of intelligence is not within the individual, but within those who refuse to acknowledge it. She stared at the final sentence for a long time before saving the document and printing it. Then, she slid it into a folder. Ms. Carmichael wanted to put her in her place. But by Monday, she would be the one left speechless. The classroom was unusually quiet that morning. The other students seemed to sense the tension, like they knew something big was about to happen. Lena walked in, her essay in hand, and made her way to Ms. Carmichael's desk. Without a word, she placed it down. Ms. Carmichael glanced at the folder, then at Lena. "Finished already?" she said, arching an eyebrow. Lena nodded. "Yes." Ms. Carmichael smirked. "We'll see if it's actually good." She picked up the folder, but Lena didn't move. She waited, because she knew what was coming next. Ms. Carmichael opened the folder, eyes scanning the first page. Then the second. By the third page, her smirk was gone. By the fifth, her fingers tightened around the paper. And by the final paragraph, her lips had pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Lena watched it all happen in real time, the slow realization that this wasn't just another essay. It was a direct, calculated attack on everything Ms. Carmichael had done to her. The teacher inhaled sharply, closing the folder. "This," she started, but then stopped. She forced a small, bitter laugh. "Quite an interesting perspective, Lena." Lena met her gaze. "Thank you." Ms. Carmichael hesitated, like she wanted to say something else. But before she could, the bell rang, and the rest of the students filed in. Lena turned and walked to her seat, feeling every eye in the room on her. She had won this round. But she wasn't done yet. Because Ms. Carmichael wasn't going to let this go. And Lena, she was ready for whatever came next. Ms. Carmichael didn't react immediately. She didn't return Lena's essay that day. Or the next. Or even the day after that. But something had shifted. The teacher had always been strict, but now she was calculated. She didn't call on Lena in class anymore. Didn't make snide remarks. Instead, she watched. Waiting. And Lena knew why. Ms. Carmichael wasn't just angry. She was planning something. By Friday, the tension had reached its peak. Lena sat in her usual seat, listening as Ms. Carmichael passed back graded assignments. She knew hers was coming, but she also knew it wasn't going to be as simple as a grade written in red ink. Sure enough, Ms. Carmichael paused at Lena's desk, placing the folder down a little too carefully. The class went silent. Lena flipped it open. Her eyes landed on the grade. AD. She barely blinked. The murmurs started immediately. AD. No way. Lena never gets anything less than an A. Ms. Carmichael cleared her throat, her voice saccharine. "Lena, I'd like to speak with you after class." And that's when Lena knew. This wasn't about the essay. This was about control. Ms. Carmichael wasn't going to fail her outright. That would be too obvious. Instead, she gave her a near-failing grade. Something low enough to humiliate her, but not enough to justify a formal complaint. Lena calmly closed the folder. She didn't react. Didn't flinch. She just nodded. All right. But inside, she was already 10 steps ahead. After class, Lena approached Ms. Carmichael's desk, meeting her gaze with an unsettling calm. "Yes," she said. Ms. Carmichael smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Lena, I'm disappointed." Lena tilted her head. "Because I wrote too well." The smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Ms. Carmichael recovered quickly. "Because you missed the point of the assignment. You used this as an opportunity to challenge authority instead of exploring the topic objectively." "I did explore it objectively." Ms. Carmichael sighed, feigning patience. "Then why does your essay read like a personal attack?" Lena didn't blink. "Because it wasn't personal until you made it that way." Ms. Carmichael's jaw clenched. "You can either rewrite the assignment or accept the grade," she said, her voice firm. Lena stared at her, expression unreadable. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a second folder. Ms. Carmichael frowned. "What is that?" Lena placed it on the desk. "A copy of my essay," she said, voice steady. "And a formal request for an independent review." For the first time, Ms. Carmichael looked truly stunned. Lena continued, unwavering. "I've already sent an email to the principal. If my work is as flawed as you claim, then you shouldn't mind someone else grading it." Ms. Carmichael's fingers twitched, but she kept her composure. "Barely." Lena took a step back. "This isn't about my intelligence," she said quietly. "It's about your ego. And we both know it." Then she turned and walked out, leaving Ms. Carmichael to realize she had just lost the upper hand. By Monday morning, the entire school knew about Lena's challenge. It started as whispers in the hallways. By lunchtime, it had spread like wildfire. "Did you hear?" Lena Walker reported Ms. Carmichael. "No way." "For what?" "Gave her AD on purpose. She's making the principal regrade her essay." Ms. Carmichael must hate that. Lena ignored the stares, the hushed conversations around her. She kept her head down, eating her lunch in the usual quiet corner of the cafeteria. But she wasn't alone. Jake slid into the seat across from her, grinning like he had just won the lottery. "Okay, I need to know," he said, leaning in. "How did you even think of that?" Lena took a sip of her drink. "Because I knew she'd do it." Jake blinked. "Wait, you knew she was going to fail you?" Lena nodded. "Not fail. Just low enough that I couldn't fight it directly. But I had my essay reviewed by an English professor over the weekend." Jake's jaw dropped. Lena continued, unbothered. "He said it was college level. So if Ms. Carmichael gives it a D, and a professional calls it outstanding," she shrugged, "it proves she was never grading my work. She was grading me." Jake whistled low under his breath. "You're scary smart, you know that?" Lena didn't respond. Because in that moment, she saw something across the cafeteria. Ms. Carmichael. She was walking with the principal, Mr. Holloway. And she did not look happy. Lena placed her tray aside and stood up. "It's starting." Jake frowned. "What is?" Lena gave him a knowing look before walking toward the office. "Checkmate." The principal's office was quiet, but tense. Lena sat in a chair across from Mr. Holloway, her essay placed neatly on his desk. Ms. Carmichael sat stiffly beside him, arms crossed, her face unreadable. The principal cleared his throat. "Ms. Walker, I've reviewed your request. And I must say, your essay is impressive." Lena remained silent. Mr. Holloway glanced at Ms. Carmichael. "And I have to agree, it does not warrant AD." Ms. Carmichael's fingers clenched against her sleeve. "However," Mr. Holloway continued, "Ms. Carmichael believes you wrote this essay in defiance of the assignment's intent." Lena tilted her head. "Did the prompt specify how we had to argue our point?" He hesitated. "No." "So my essay was structured, well-researched, and within the assignment's guidelines?" Another pause. Then, finally, Yes. Lena turned to Ms. Carmichael. Then why did I get a D? Ms. Carmichael's lips pressed into a thin line. Because I felt your focus was not academic, but personal. Lena interrupted. Ms. Carmichael hesitated. Lena didn't blink. That's the problem, she continued. It wasn't personal, until you decided it was. Silence. Then Mr. Holloway sighed, rubbing his temples. I'm raising your grade to an A, he said finally. And Ms. Carmichael, I think it's best we consider this matter resolved. Ms. Carmichael looked like she had swallowed glass. Lena stood. Thank you. And just like that, it was over. Except, it wasn't. Because as Lena turned to leave, Ms. Carmichael spoke. This doesn't change anything. Lena stopped in the doorway, glancing back. Ms. Carmichael's eyes burned with frustration. You might have won this round, but the real world isn't always fair, Lena. Lena met her gaze. Calm. Unshaken. No, it's not, she agreed. Then she smiled, just the smallest, quietest hint of one. But it is when you're smarter. And with that, she walked out, leaving Ms. Carmichael to sit there, knowing she had just been outplayed. The fallout from the meeting spread through Ridgewood High like wildfire. By the next day, everyone knew that Lena had officially won. Her grade had been changed. The principal had sided with her. And most importantly, Ms. Carmichael had been publicly proven wrong. For the first time, the feared teacher had been bested by a student. And not just any student. The quiet girl she had underestimated. But Lena wasn't interested in the rumors or the stares. She walked into class as if nothing had happened, taking her usual seat, opening her notebook, ready to learn. The atmosphere was thick, the class waiting for Ms. Carmichael's reaction. The teacher entered with her usual sharp posture, but something about her was different. Stiffer. Colder. And when she turned to face the class, her gaze landed on Lena for just a fraction of a second. Then she started the lesson. No insults. No attempts to humiliate her. Just teaching. Lena wasn't surprised. Ms. Carmichael had lost. She knew she had lost. And the only way to save face was to act like it had never happened. Lena allowed herself the smallest victory. Because Ms. Carmichael might still be standing at the front of the room, but she was the one who had been put in her place. Later that afternoon, Lena sat in the library, flipping through a book, when Jake dropped into the seat across from her. You have to tell me that felt good, he said, grinning. Lena raised an eyebrow. What? Oh, I don't know, completely outsmarting the most feared teacher in school? Exposing her ego. Walking away with your grade fixed and her reputation cracked. Lena didn't respond right away. Instead, she closed the book and looked out the window. Winning isn't about proving someone wrong, she said quietly. It's about making sure they never doubt you again. Jake shook his head, laughing under his breath. You really are scary smart. Lena finally looked at him, a small smirk playing at the corner of her lips. I know. Ms. Carmichael never tried to challenge Lena again. She didn't give her special treatment. Didn't try to sabotage her grades. She just left her alone. But the lesson had been learned. And by the end of the semester, it wasn't Lena who had to prove anything. It was Ms. Carmichael, forced to carry the knowledge that, for the first time, a student had been smarter than her. And had made sure she never forgot it. Now, let me ask you, have you ever dealt with someone who tried to bring you down just because they underestimated you? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. And if you loved this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching.